Great. Thanks, Leah. So good morning, BEAC members and stakeholders. My name is Andy Young. I'm the Deputy City Manager for the City of Falls Church, and I have the honor of being the BEAC Chair here for 2024. So thanks to Leah and the COG staff for getting us all together again today. Excited for a discussion kind of later on in the agenda for building decarbonization. So we've got a good panel of folks here to share some different perspectives and ideas and what jurisdictions are doing to help make progress on decarbonizing our buildings in the National Capital Region. So we're going to hold jurisdiction and other introductions until agenda item number 4, kind of as our usual routine. And as Leah mentioned, please remember to put your name and affiliation in the chat. So, so I think we'll start with approval of the June 20th, 2024 meeting summary. So hopefully everybody got a chance to take a look at that prior to today's meeting. For those that have not, we'll give you a minute or two to take a look at that. And that should be in an email that you got from Leah here ahead of today's meeting. Okay, anybody have any suggested changes to the meeting summary that they'd like to share with us? All right, hearing none, the June meeting summary is final. So, man, we're making all sorts of progress today. We're just moving right along in the agenda. So, so we'll get into our first topic today. So, Alyssa Boggs from the COG staff is going to give us an update on the energy utility data update. So, Alyssa, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Leah, were you going to present or do you want me to share? You're muted.
Oh, you should see it now. Do you see it now?
No.
One sec.
I can see it now. Thank you. For those who don't know me, I'm Alyssa Boggs. I'm an environmental planner here at COG. I took over this year doing the utility energy. It was Tim Masters before. So just a little bit of background. Every year, COG sends out its annual utility energy data survey to the 9 utilities, gas and electric in the region, and we send it out at the very beginning of the new year, and then the deadline is at the end of March so that we have enough time to process and analyze the data and have an adequate QA/QC period. Unfortunately, this year we have not yet received Dominion's 2023 data due to a new billing system. So just keep in mind that this is draft data and we use 2022 Dominion data so that the trend lines weren't looking too off. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So all of this data is in the Dropbox folder, which every BEAC member should have access to. If you do not have access to it, please send me an email and we'll get you access. In this Dropbox, we have every year's raw data from every utility. We don't have data between 2005 and 2009. But yeah, every year's summary sheet is also in there. If you don't want to look at the raw data, it's all in a pretty wrapped up summary sheet for each individual year. And then there's also an all year summary. And in addition, there's the all years grid connected renewable summary sheet. Yeah, you can go to the next slide. So this shows the total electricity and natural gas consumption for both residential and commercial sectors. You can see that the electricity, which is in blue, has a very steady increase, whereas the natural gas is kind of variable. And the natural gas is very weather related. So like a mild winter, we usually see less natural gas usage. And you can go to the next slide. So if we split up electricity further into residential and commercial energy, we can actually see that residential is very flat in the blue, and commercial has been steady increasing since about 2010. And that slight increase we saw in the total electricity was mostly just due to this commercial energy. So we can go to the next slide. So if we further break down the commercial electricity into Maryland, DC, and Virginia, we can actually see that DC and Maryland are pretty flat. Whereas Northern Virginia, we start seeing a higher uptick in about 2017-ish area, which is consistent with the data centers in our region. We can go to the next slide. So we're going to break it down even further here and go by jurisdictions. We did not put the city jurisdictions in here just so it's not too crowded and you can sort of see what is happening. But if we're breaking down by county, we can see that Loudoun County and Prince William County are kind of seeing that larger increase in 2017 and beyond, whereas everyone else has stayed mostly flat. The lines between 2005 and 2009 should be dashed. Those are draft, or not draft, those are data that we did not have. So all of those are basically straight trend lines because we just had to interpolate. But if you look at Frederick County, which is that line that goes sharply down and then stays flat, that is due to a smelting plant closing in 2000, in between 2005 and 2009, which accounted for 1/3 of their commercial energy. And all of these, if you want to see the further city breakdowns in that all years sheet in the Dropbox, we have more graphs like this. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So now breaking down the natural gas, we have the residential and commercial natural gas. We can kind of see that this aligns with in that like first slide of the graphs I showed of the natural gas data kind of being very variable. This aligns well with that. We have more residential natural gas consumption than commercial in our region. Yeah, we can go to the next slide to see the commercial broken down. So Maryland has had a steadier uptick in the past couple years than DC and Northern Virginia have stayed a little bit more flat. And then we'll see why in the next slide. So Prince George's County has seen a very large increase, even just in the last year, because they opened a new natural gas power plant, sort of in the southern area of the county by the Charles County line. So this is kind of bringing that whole commercial trend upwards. We can go to the next slide. So here is the grid-connected renewable energy systems. This includes solar and wind. I want to make a big emphasis again that this is draft data. We do not have Dominion's 2023 data, which includes solar data. So this 82,000 number is very draft. And also being that this is all renewable energy systems and that it also does include wind, it's still shows where we are on solar because we have fewer than 50 wind systems in our region, and they account for less than 15 kilowatts of capacity. So, or 15,000, yeah, no, 15 kilowatts. But yeah, I think we should also emphasize that all of our renewable energy systems in the region account to just under a gigawatt without having Dominion's 2023 data. So hopefully when we get that data, we'll see that we have officially a gigawatt of renewable energy. And then next slide, I think, is going over to Tim to talk about our greenhouse gas inventory.
Great, thanks, Alyssa. Can folks hear me? Okay, awesome. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to provide a bit of background on a few items as they relate to COG's greenhouse gas inventories. Really glad we're ahead of schedule because it's actually a lot to break down, but I'm still going to try and get through this quickly so we have some time for any questions. But yeah, basically, COG completes inventories for our member jurisdictions and the region as a whole approximately every 3 years or so. We are currently in the process of collecting and analyzing data to be used in the calendar year 2023 inventory. And this slide really just shows a very simplified version of the inventory timeline that we're working with at the moment. So we've been collecting and analyzing data since the start of this year, but this chart reflects the timeline moving forward from right now. We'll really be working on emission calculations for all these various sectors up to the summer of 2025. Usually that's when we kind of wrap up the on-road sector, and that's kind of the last sector we complete before we have draft emission results. So at that point, we hope to present the draft results to CEPC and make those draft results fully available to BEEAC and CEPC members. There will also be a comment period thereafter, as well as any one-on-one meetings if folks are interested in those once they've seen those draft results. Thereafter, we'll aim to finalize those results by the winter of 2025. And those final deliverables will include a greenhouse gas data summary for each of our local jurisdictions, as well as for the region as a whole. It'll include greenhouse gas inventory summary fact sheets for, again, each jurisdiction and the region as a whole, as well as contribution analyses to see what was really driving emissions up or down, again, for each jurisdiction and the region as a whole. Next slide, please. So this slide, we kind of included this just to have a quick conversation around renewable energy credits and how that relates to our COG inventories. This is ICLEI's guidance, which closely mirrors the global protocol's guidance in terms of how we include RECs in inventories. A key thing to note about greenhouse gas inventory protocols is that there's no double counting. In this context, we do not want to double count any renewables. And COG inventories currently fall into the do column. So that column there on the left, our inventories fall in that. We have a location-based approach to our greenhouse gas inventories. And if renewables are deployed within the greater region, we already count those renewables. The proceed with caution column in the center, that represents a market-based approach. If you go with this option, you need to report both your location-based results as well as market-based results. Currently, ICLEI does not recommend that local governments purchase RECs as an emissions reduction strategy, especially unbundled RECs. However, having said that, there are some cases where acquiring RECs as part of a power purchase agreement or a utility green power program can make sense. In those cases, RECs may be included in inventories, but only in parallel with an inventory that does not include RECs. Therefore, you would need to report both a location-based approach inventory alongside those market-based approach results. So we have not discussed making any changes to our current approach. Obviously, we do not want to move into that don't column on the right there. But if local jurisdictions want to discuss potential options for the proceed with caution category, we'd be interested in opening up those conversations with you and see if there is data that we can use and potentially work into our inventories. So definitely please reach out to either myself, Alyssa, or Maya Davis and we can set up a call with our team. And yeah, would love to hear your ideas for your community on that. So next slide. I'll quickly kind of just run through an example of that REC situation. The example we have here is the Amazon Arlington solar farm in Virginia. This is a virtual power purchase agreement. And this is something that could be potentially incorporated into a greenhouse gas inventory via the REC guidance. So Arlington's agreement with Dominion Energy is to purchase around 32% of the output from a 120 megawatt peak solar installation. That's in Pittsylvania County in Virginia. Arlington County government will receive credit for a portion of the solar energy and the RECs it produces. And the energy production purchased by the county from this project represents approximately 83% of the total amount of electricity used by the county government each year. So that solar farm was operational in 2022. So technically it could be potentially included in a 2023 inventory. The location-based emissions still should be reported alongside the market-based results, as I mentioned in the previous slide. And this approach could make a really big impact on the county's government operations emissions. Since in the past, they've developed their own government operations inventories. They have included both location-based and market-based results. The Amazon solar farm hasn't been included, but it recently came online, so that might be something we see in Arlington County's government operations inventory in the future. But when we look at our COG inventories, the government operations emissions in the county are only about 3 to 4% of the total community-wide emissions. So if this was the only power purchase agreement included in the community-wide inventory for Arlington County, it would make much less of an impact. So that is something to bear in mind. Another thing to bear in mind if we were to start incorporating these types of market-based approaches in our inventories would be that actually gathering all those PPA data sets for the whole region would be quite a challenging process. So that's also something to be aware of. But yeah, again, open to hear your thoughts on that moving forward. So next slide, and this will be the last slide I talked to here. So I just kind of wanted to give you a bit of an overview of the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, or GCOM, as well as our COG badges that we've earned under that program. So under the Obama administration, we were recognized as a US Climate Action Champion. CPC is a GCOM signatory, which means we strive to meet the global best management practices in climate planning. We currently report to the main global platform for greenhouse gas planning and action every couple of years. That's CDP. And CDP is basically a third party that verifies that we're meeting global protocols for inventories. They've done this twice for us. And that we also meet the global best management practices for our mitigation and adaptation goals and plans. So they recognize these verifications through badges. We meet all the mitigation and adaptation badges. So that means we get the compliance badge at the bottom. What's new is the energy badge. So you'll see that there's that energy column there that's new. Right now, it's only the plan section that's colored in yellow, and the other two are kind of grayed out. So that the energy badge is new, and this doesn't count toward full compliance yet. This really doesn't generically refer to energy though, but is much more focused on energy equity. To earn this badge, they are looking for specific energy equity assessments and quantifiable energy equity goal. They have options, but reducing energy burden is a key part of that. So this is relatively new. We don't have an assessment or goal just yet for that kind of energy equity piece, although our plan does speak to that. So we do get the plan badge, but not those other two. But yeah, this has been brought up to CEPC to kind of get a bit more of their input on, and also interested to hear your thoughts on pursuing those other badges. But yeah, I'll leave it there. I don't know if Alyssa or Maya have anything additional to add, but I'll stop there and open it up for questions. Thank you very much. Oh, also just on the last slide, you can also find our contact information for Alyssa and myself if you have any questions. See, Steve, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Yeah, it's just one comment and one question. First, yeah, thanks for the slides about the market-based piece, and that's certainly something top of mind for us, given the VPPA. And so looking forward to working with you all on that and sort of displaying both location-based and market-based. We also report annually our county operations GHG emissions through the Better Climate Challenge, and had some guidance through that, for how to include and sort of speak to the location versus market-based. And so, excited for those conversations, but just kind of wanted to share that piece with you. And then also wanted to ask just a quick question about the Dominion electricity data. If you have any more sort of specifics on when that data may be available from our friends over at Dominion, if they gave any timeline, or it's just kind of a hurry up and wait situation.
I'll let you take that.
Thanks, Tim. Any day now, we'll hopefully be able to get it and analyze it quickly, and hopefully the data is good and we don't need to have any revisions, and any day now, hopefully.
Okay, great. And
That's my answer.
Appreciate that. And I know their billing system has been real friend with a lot of my colleagues over in Virginia know that all too well. So appreciate it.
Yeah, new billing system can really shake things up.
A lot of pain for everyone, but appreciate you keeping on top of it. Thanks.
So I'll jump in. Tim and Alyssa, appreciate the presentation. Can you elaborate a little bit more on, so the location versus market-based kind of renewable energy, particularly guidance changes, and can you talk a little bit about kind of the effect that might have on the broader greenhouse gas inventory for the region that you're putting together? It strikes me kind of as a pretty substantive change that's going to affect kind of our results, but I'm interested in your thoughts.
Well, again, this isn't something we're going to be implementing right now. We're definitely open to just hearing from local jurisdictions if that's something folks are interested in. But yeah, adding in that market-based approach would, lower the overall emissions for a lot of counties, just based on the fact that, yeah, purchases of more renewable energy, of course, lowers emissions for some of our local jurisdictions. We would still need to report our location-based results alongside that, but at least it would kind of just break it down further, and folks would be able to see the impact of those REC purchases, if it is, power purchase agreements, etc. So we would see an impact where emissions are being driven down. To what extent that is, and also to what extent the data is available, are two pretty big questions for us still, but definitely looking for input from folks if that is an approach people are wanting to take, and seeing what best way we could potentially integrate that into our inventories.
And I would also add that the gross emissions, the location-based gross emissions inventories will always be the core of our inventory work and the main things that we're reporting. And when we report additional statistics on the inventory, it'll be based off of that location-based gross emissions inventory. And then what you'll see on the side, like what we already have, is a net for carbon sequestration. That's another additional calculation that we notate. The market base would be another additional calculation that we notate, but the core of the inventory work we do is the gross location-based inventories that you have always been getting and you will continue to get. So we don't want to take away from that, but we can add additional stories about, you know, like how last time we added an additional story about forest and tree sequestration, and we can add an additional story about, you know, fully recognizing rec purchases, for instance. So these are like additional stories to the core.
Thank you.
Chair, it looks like there are a couple questions in the chat. One from Emily Curley with Montgomery County. She says that would include private sector rec purchasing too. And I think Maya, it's obviously to what you were just saying. And then Gielia Manuel, has there been any analysis around whether data centers could meet energy demand with bundled recs?
So I think that it could be much easier to like incorporate the virtual PPAs that you all do and vet those with you all. I think the challenge is the private sector. I mean, we can grab that you know, as much data as we can on that, but do they fall into that don't column that ICLEI calls for? I think that would be probably the most challenging part. Is that providing for additionality to the grid? Is that, you know, falling into, or is that falling into like an unbundled rec category? So I think the private sector would be the most challenging part of that. And we definitely have to do some digging and research and data analysis and have stakeholder conversations around that. And then to the second question about data centers. So one thing that we want to do through the CCAP, the CPRG Comprehensive Climate Action Plan, is we're going to be relooking at our greenhouse gas projections and making sure that we are fully incorporating the new projections for data centers and how will that affect our overall ability to meet our regional goals. And also this summer, there was a very interesting presentation at the Loudoun County Board of Directors, one of their subcommittee meetings, and I'll share a link to that. And there's a report by Supervisor Turner where he looked a lot at the data centers and looking at the need for the data centers to have microgrids to deploy solar and wind, but also you know, the challenges of trying to meet the data center demand with just solar and wind, and, you know, some of the thoughts and research around how there's more of a all energy approach needed, how there's a look at nuclear as an option, and how coal plants might not be shut down as quickly because of the data center demand. So I'll drop that link in there in case anybody's interested and hasn't seen that yet.
Chair Young, I don't think there are any more questions or hands raised. Nothing else in the chat.
Steve Bird, you still got your hands up. Did you have something else that you wanted to talk about, or?
Apologies, I was just a vestigial hand up there, so I'll take it down. Sorry.
No, hey, no worries. Just wanted to make sure. Okay. Well, great. I think we all appreciate that update. Melissa, Tim, Maya. So we'll kind of move on to the next part of the agenda, if that's okay. So the next part of the agenda is our jurisdiction roundtable and exchange, and so I'm going to open it up for jurisdictions to comment on 3 framing questions we sent out related to today's primary topic on building decarbonization. So So this will help kind of frame up the next discussion, which is going to be led by our Vice Chair, Al Carr. So the three questions we kind of put out for everybody, real quick are: what policy, goals, and regulations does your jurisdiction have in place for decarbonizing its buildings? Number two, is your jurisdiction tracking property owner feedback to the regulations, and what has been their response? And third, what specific efforts have been made to support compliance for affordable or LMI buildings in your jurisdiction? So, hey, as we get started, please be sure to include your name and jurisdiction when given an update. Try to keep your comments brief, but we do want to hear from you, so we get through the designated time. So let's go ahead and start with the Maryland local governments. Anybody from Maryland want to start us off, and hold the state's input to the panel discussion, but welcome any local jurisdictions to chime in. Don't everybody go at once.
I might just step up and chime in here, because I know Montgomery County's working on their building codes, and I'm not sure where they are in the adoption. But so City of Rockville, in May we did adopt the 2021 IECC, and that will go into effect December 1st this year. And so we went through with the fine-tooth comb and added some local amendments to make sure it was, helping us achieve our green goals. And that includes requiring, so we adopted some of the optional, appendices and things that include requiring solar ready spaces for residential with, of course, lots of exceptions for shade and things like that, as well as storage ready and solar ready for commercial buildings. And we also required grid integration for water heaters and thermostats. We require, just going through everything, energy storage ready spaces and electrical panel space for energy storage for commercial, as well as electrification ready standards for residential and commercial, including having those electrical plugs and panel capacity for wherever you're installing a dryer or a heater. And just adopting the code, increase the energy efficiency. We did just stick with the code. I think the county is looking at adopting ASHRAE straight out. But we stuck with the code, but we also adopted the it's a TSPR. It's like a performance-based system for HVAC systems as an optional pathway for commercial. We also adopted electric vehicle installed and EV ready and EV capable standards. And I'm wondering, and this is a slight aside, but I'm kind of wondering if other jurisdictions have adopted EVSE installed yet, or if we're the first in the region. There might be a couple I haven't had a chance to look through. So that's basically that. Are we going through all three questions? I feel like I've taken a lot of space, so I will pass the mic on.
Thank you, Amanda. Others from the state of Maryland?
I can chime in. This is Emily Curley with Montgomery County Department of Environmental Protection. So got a lot of things going on. I guess within DEP, we don't manage the building codes as much, so I'll leave that. But I believe the 2021 codes are out for public comment right now. So I do have a link to that if anybody's curious about seeing the codes that are, being considered right now. In terms of existing buildings, again, I work on our commercial energy program. So as many of you know, we passed a building performance standards law back in 2022, and then have been, the county council has been considering the building performance standard regulations. So those are still at county council right now. But essentially we've proposed a site energy use intensity standard for existing commercial and multifamily buildings over 25,000 square feet. So that's about 1,800 buildings, something like 230 million gross square feet is currently covered by the law, and then we'll kind of have more details about the requirements when it comes to BEPS as soon as those are passed. On the residential side, I think I saw Jeremy Good from my team on, so I don't know if Jeremy, you want to follow me and talk about the electrification program that you run. But yes, our jurisdiction is very much tracking property owner feedback to the regulations. I feel like this could be an entire conversation about their response, but you know, certainly concerns when it comes to commercial real estate and, you know, the office market coming out of the pandemic and sort of how things are being positioned there. You know, very fair, and you know, there's a Montgomery County just passed rent stabilization, right? So there's this what's the word, push pull between, you know, maintaining affordable housing, adding housing, and then also improving those buildings. And then so how does BEPS work with rent stabilization? And yeah, and again, we did have a public comment period on our BEPS, so probably the best thing would be, you know, if you want to read the 100+ page packet, you'd get a very good sense of the feedback that we've gotten there. And then, yeah, so, and as far as support for LMI or other under-resourced buildings. So one thing that's been working great, I would say, is that the Montgomery County Green Bank, which we are fortunate to have in Montgomery County, has been providing technical assistance, both around kind of the early stages of benchmarking and tracking energy data, but then also around energy audits, electrification feasibility studies, EV readiness, renewable energy feasibility studies, things like that. And so they have kind of purposely been dedicating more funds to, you know, nonprofit-owned buildings in equity emphasis areas. And we've seen a lot of great case studies coming out on that as well. So I'll leave it there. I'll put a couple links in the chat if you want more information. And again, if anybody else from my team is on and wants to chime in, please do. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Emily. I can just jump in here to add on to the residential side. Jeremy Good from Montgomery County DEP. And right now we have two electrification pilots. One is for market rate and the other is for low and moderate income. And Electrify MC, and I'll put some links in the chat as well. That goes through a specific contractor, Elysian Energy, and they are providing a help desk for resident questions. And then we offer incentives for a variety of electrification projects. And given that, you know, when this came about a couple years ago, you know, the concept came about, there weren't many contractors available. So we went through an RFP process, but for right now, all the projects go through Elysian Energy. You know, we're looking to change that in the future because a lot of people prefer to work with their own contractor. Then on the LMI side, this June we started HECAP, which is an outgoing grant program and includes electrification, climate adaptation, and pre-weatherization. You know, there's quite a bit of call for repairing roofs or dealing with mold problems, asbestos, et cetera, that kind of disqualify houses from the Maryland weatherization programs. And so we're trying to get those problems resolved and then get those households back in the loop to complete weatherization. And we don't have I guess I'll quickly mention two other things. We did send out a survey for Electrify MC participants. That's sort of the mechanism we've had to get feedback so far. We are then separately planning to do a home energy labeling program that would take effect at the time of listing to get essentially a home energy score to give information to prospective buyers, you know, add to the body of knowledge that we have about the residential building stock, and then also help drive electrification and other decarbonization. And I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks, Emily. Any other folks from Maryland?
Yeah, this is Dory Estrada with the City of Tacoma Park. Just wanted to chime in here briefly. Don't have much to add on what's been said about building regulations because obviously we fall under the Montgomery County jurisdiction for that. But on the programmatic side, our office has been really active in promoting Electrify MC, as well as the HECAP. We helped with a letter of support for a successful proposal. And together with that partner, we've been working pretty concentratedly with some on-the-ground groups, including one focused on seniors who we know represent a fair portion of our low and moderate income homeowners, to really spread the word about that and help them with their application for that program, which is great. We think it's a really great initiative from the county. Separately from that, for our multifamily buildings, which are 50% of the building stock in Tacoma Park, and a lot of them falling into the LMI category for tenants, we have initiated this multifamily building improvement grant program. It's still in its early stages, but we've been working with a selected contractor to conduct energy audits at 7 properties that were selected as part of the first cohort of that. The money for this program is a bridge between the city's remaining ARPA funds, some DHCD money that was part of a grant award, and some budgetary money from the city. And we're quite excited about it. This is the first time we're sort of kind of revamping this program and incorporating this mandatory energy audit component before making awards. And we think it's going to be able to result in some really great electrification and decarbonization projects. Most of the buildings are quite old and they really do need these upgrades. So happy to share more about that when we're further along as well.
Great, thank you, Dory. Anybody else from the state of Maryland? Okay, we'll move on to the District of Columbia. I think we've got some district folks participating in our panel, but anybody else from the district that have anything they want to share? Okay, so then we'll shift over finally to Virginia. And so we've got Arlington County also on our panel, but other jurisdictions from the state of Virginia that want to share some thoughts today. Noting that the rules in Virginia are very different than the rules in the state of Maryland that we got to follow.
Hey, Andy, it's Demetra, and I apologize because I haven't read the agenda in great detail. Is Steve going to talk to all of the building programs, including the Green Building Incentive Program?
Well, maybe we'll let Steve answer that.
I was just going to focus on the decarb tool, Demetra, so I think this might be a great opportunity for you to dive into that.
Great. Do you mind if I just take 2 quick minutes, Andy? Okay, so as you noted, we're in Virginia, so we're not allowed to have a stick, so we have to rely a lot of the time on carrots. So a lot of folks know about the county's Green Building Incentive Program. It was first launched in 1999, 2000. It's undergone 5 or 6 iterations since then, upgrades as they call them, or updates. And we basically decided this time to go bold or go home. So we gutted the entire program and just rebuilt it from the bottom up. So in terms of electrification, what we've done that's new is we've added, in addition to new design and construction, an existing buildings pathway and an adaptive reuse pathway. We're really pushing for new construction. We're incentivizing in unique ways FEOS and ILFI design. So obviously electrification is built into those standards and certifications. We're also, and Steve can speak to it better, early next year, we're going to be updating our county facilities, sustainable facilities policy. In terms of electrification, I think that we're also, well, we are executing a grant project right now under the EPA's Environmental Justice G2G program. One of the key deliverables under that is going to be an open source decision support tool that really we've designed by pirating the design that Steve developed for the county that he's going to talk about, that decision support tool. What this is going to do for private sector buildings is really go into low income, disadvantaged communities, start collecting kind of dominant categories of buildings, both small commercial and residential, mainly multifamily and obviously in residential. It's going to profile that, and it's going to be a tool that we can use to model and gauge and spit out a lot of metrics. We're really creating that tool and the other tools under the grant for the use mainly of developers and building owners. So we're hoping that with that education, with that training on the tool can demystify the process for them somewhat. So we're hoping that there's greater voluntary uptake by use of these tools. And with our green building program, recently, I have to say, and I'm sure everybody, kind of confronts the same challenge more often than we'd like, is that when we go into, Arlington is so small, so we're building up in high density buildings. And when we go into parking garages, our standard GBIP threshold was 4% of the parking, EV actionable, actual charging stations, 4% of the parking garage capacity with a 10% additional EV ready. But the problem that we've run into pretty frequently is that the developers come back and say the load letter was rejected by Dominion. And they will have to invest in additional infrastructure, generally transformers, in order to meet that height. And so we are, obviously concerned, particularly in high density areas, which is where you're really trying to gain that kind of volume and aggregation, that the grid is really insufficient. And we're really talking about, okay, who's going to bear the cost of expanding the grid? I know that when we go to electrify our transportation in the county, it's not uncommon that we have to invest additional capital funds in order to be able to achieve our goals. So I'll leave it at that. And we should be taking this to our board, our green building program. That's going to include a training cohort and a couple of other elements. So we're hoping to take that to the board at the end of the year.
Thank you, Demetra. Is there a draft of that revised green building program out there that you could share, or do we got to wait for the reveal with your board?
We'll be happy to send you we've been doing public because it's such a dramatic overhaul and it's unprecedented. It also includes financial incentives for the first time. So we've been briefing a lot of different groups, obviously. So I'm happy to share with you guys the briefing deck. And it'll just break it down. And it's probably more interesting to read and more digestible than the red line hot mess of the prior version.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hey, thanks.
All right. Any others from Virginia that'd like to share today?
Chair, I think there was a comment or a hand raised by Alexandria. I don't know if they took it down, but there was a hand raised. And,
no, my hand is up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, go for it, Valerie.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Just kind of some overviews. We launched the City Building Performance Program. That is for all of our city buildings, and we are benchmarking what they're doing in creating energy plans against a trajectory model. So they have to meet the goals within our EAP 2040. And this has been sort of a realignment of the way that we sort of track our buildings, do the maintenance, but then also the CIP process. And so we're trying to avoid this last minute emergency kind of responses to doing things, excuse me, or disconnected and trying to find a way to maximize the resources that we have. Still in process. So we also are launching an EcoCity Academy, which is going to be to try and reach our public and have them better engage in ways that they could save energy and how they understand their impact on what they're doing. On the business side of it, we also launched a Green Business Recognition Program. So we're trying to get businesses to look at how they do what they do. We all know that the most difficult sector for us to deal with, since we have limited authority, is the private sector. So this is an attempt to highlight what others are doing and to encourage others to participate and to help those who are doing it sort of keep moving forward with that. We are in the process of updating our 2019 green building policy. I'm not in a position to share anything at this point. All I can say is we are in process. When I have more, I'd be happy to. And then we've also been exploring right-of-way issues. Our EV program is very robust and has been moving forward. We've also proposed geothermal, sort of a utility scale geothermal type project, and right-of-way again came up. So this is something that we're exploring. As we move forward with that, I can share more. I don't know if others have some of the same issues, but at this point, that's what I have to share.
Great, thank you, Valerie. Anybody else? Okay, well, I appreciate it's kind of cool to hear about like all the different things kind of jurisdictions are doing to kind of advance the cause here. So with that, I think we're going to pivot to our panel. So I'm going to turn it over to Al Carr, who's our Vice Chair of BEAC, to help facilitate the discussion. Al?
Thanks, Andy. This agenda item is a panel discussion on building decarbonization, specifically looking at policy requirements and regulations developed by state and local governments and the impact on the private sector in the region. I have a list of questions which the panelists have received in advance to prepare their responses, and they have presentations, but I will ask the questions so they can respond verbally. We probably won't get through all the questions, but you'll have their presentations for reference. On the panel, we have Steve Burr, Energy Manager with Arlington's Department of Environmental Services, Samuel Furio on the Building Decarbonization Team within the Maryland Department of the Environment, Katie Bergfeld, Branch Chief of the DC Department of Energy and Environment's award-winning Building Performance and Enforcement Branch, and lastly, Brian Anlou, Vice President, and Chris Penley, Director of Sustainability Policy and Strategy with AOBA. So the first question I will direct to Arlington and to MDE and to DOEE. Describe your jurisdiction's building decarbonization goals and requirements, including specific regulations like BEPS. And I'll give it to Steve first for Arlington.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for the introduction, Al, and the question. And so I'll start with so I'm going to focus a lot on the government facilities with the decarbonization tool, as as Demetra noted, that there are obviously different authorities in Virginia, and so and she touched upon the Green Building Incentive Program for the community goals, and so yeah, I'm going to focus more on like county facilities and sort of county operations. And so the county does have a lot of plans and requirements. Chiefly from our community energy plan, there's a goal area around buildings, energy efficiency with the target, as well as an entire section on the county government operations. The county also has a carbon roadmap where we have the implementation strategies to push forward those policies within the CEP. And so there's several around energy efficiency and leveraging new technologies and federal funding pieces that are goals. Additionally, the county is proud to participate in the Better Climate Challenge program through the U.S. Department of Energy. And so we finished up our 10-year cycle with a Better Buildings Challenge, where we were able to hit a 23% EUI reduction goal over the 10 years. We also have the sustainable facility policy for new building construction, and then I'll dive in with a little bit more detail, the decarbonization tool that looks at energy efficiency and decarbonization and sort of existing buildings. So I'll just pause there. I know that's a lot, but that's sort of the landscape of the goals and that Arlington County has.
Thanks, Steve. For Maryland Department of the Environment, do we have
Sure
Sandy
thing.
live?
Yep. Hey, how's it going? Good morning, everyone. Appreciate the time, and thanks for inviting us all to join in on the panel. My name is Sam Furio. I'm the outreach coordinator for Maryland Department of the Environment's Building Decarbonization team. Our team is responsible for developing and implementing the proposed building energy performance standards. I also just wanted to take a second and introduce Dr. Zach Brizola, the section head for the building decarbonization team here at MDE, where he's also joining us today and assisting in this panel as well. So thank you again for the invite. And just regarding this first question, so the state of Maryland passed the Climate Solutions Now Act in 2022, which set forth some pretty progressive emissions reduction goals for the state, being achieving a 60% reduction in GHG by 2031 compared to 2006 levels, and then achieving net zero emissions by 2045. And as part of that legislation in 2022, MDE is required to implement building energy performance standards to help meet these statewide GHG reductions, and specifically work to reduce emissions from Maryland's building sector. And so, with all meeting these goals, the legislation also requires that Maryland create net benefits and jobs for the state, as well as reduce energy costs and improve indoor and outdoor air quality for all Marylanders. So if you want to learn more about how the state is working to meet these emissions goals, you can read the Climate Pollution Reduction Plan on MDE's website. I'll drop a link in the chat here briefly. But that outlines the state's pathway toward the goals and includes all of the decarbonization policies that the state is proposing. So as far as BEPS requirements, the regulation is proposed and we intend to adopt before the end of the year. Building owners that are owners of covered buildings under the regulation will need to annually report energy use data to the department. This first reporting deadline is June 1st, 2025. And then 5 years down the road, starting in 2030, building owners will need to start meeting phased emission standards, which reduce emissions from covered buildings, leading down to net zero direct emissions by 2040 and then beyond to aid in meeting the state's goals. So I'll leave it as that. Appreciate it again, and look forward to further questions.
Thanks, Sam. And now take it away, Katie.
Hi, everybody. Just a reminder who I am, Katie Barkfeld. I am the branch chief for building performance and enforcement at the Department of Energy and Environment for the government of the District of Columbia. And I essentially oversee the district's building performance policies having to do with existing building decarbonization or efficiency. Mostly focused on efficiency right now, but looking forward to continuing to work on the decarbonization path. So I oversee the team that implements both the benchmarking and BEPS policies for the district. And just to give a broad overview, about 6 years ago, we released a plan called Clean Energy DC, which is our climate action plan for the district, with a goal to get us to, at the time, the goal was to get to 50% greenhouse gas emissions reduction by 2032. We've now been mandated by council to get to 60% reduction by 2032. And furthermore, get to carbon neutrality by 2045. So both of those things are mandated in law by council. And so Clean Energy DC was sort of our climate action plan to get us there. There's about 57 action items laid out in that plan that are modeled to get us to about 56% reduction from a 2006 baseline, I believe. So some of the bigger policies that are coming out of that plan, which have been codified now, are one, a renewable portfolio standard requirement of 100% by 2032. So we have 100% RPS requirement by 2032, with I think 15% of that coming from local solar by 2041. And then we have on the new construction side, a requirement for there to be net zero codes in place by 2026. So again, that is something that came out of the Clean Energy DC plan and has now been codified by council. So I don't work as much on the code side of things, but we are, as far as I know, we are working on sort of defining what a net zero code looks like for the district. I know that there was a vote this year to try to move to the net zero codes earlier than 2026, and I think that vote it failed. So we're still working on that through the codes process. And then on the existing building side, which is sort of my wheelhouse, we established a building energy performance standards program. Council essentially directed DOEE to take all of the benchmarking data that we've been collecting for about the past 10 years or so, and establish minimum levels of energy performance based on the local Energy Star score by property type. We were required to set the first standard January 1st, 2021. And then the way that our BEPS works is a little bit different than some jurisdictions. Essentially, we set the standard, and then any building that does not meet that standard then has to make efficiency improvements in their building over a 5-year period. So buildings have until the end of 2026 to make those efficiency improvements. Generally, the sort of what the law lays out is that we're looking for a 20% improvement in site EUI over that 5 years. So if you're doing your math correctly, we set the BEPS January 1st, 2021. We're about halfway through this first cycle. We have been mired in BEPS for the last 5 years. And I'm happy to share a lot of lessons learned on that. And then the other thing I want to mention is that we also did a study to sort of see if we should move towards a GHG-based metric rather than focusing on an efficiency metric. And we published that study at the beginning of January 2023. And essentially that study just lays out other policy models that we could be moving towards for our BPS. And within that study, we sort of looked at a model that's very similar to what Montgomery County currently has in place, where buildings are sort of on what's called a trajectory approach, getting to a net zero target that is set by property type. And then also on top of that, we recommended moving towards kind of requiring a phase out of on-site combustion of fossil fuels at that point as well. So that's just a policy model that's been put out in a study. No legislation has been introduced or passed, or any policy has been introduced to sort of follow that model. But I would say that's something that we're looking towards, hopefully in the near future, potentially moving towards. But I am not a legislator, so I can't determine that.
Thank you, Katie. The next question is for AOBA. What impact has building decarbonization policies and BEPS regulations had on property owners in the region? And what are some of the challenges?
Great, thank you. Brian Anlou, again, Vice President of Government Affairs for Maryland at AOBA. For those that don't know, AOBA represents multifamily and office building owners in the DMV. So it's also DC, Maryland, and Virginia. And so I can only speak to the Maryland piece, and Chris Penley, our Director of Sustainability, is also on the call and can help fill in the blanks with anything that maybe I miss. But I'd like to break this question up into sort of two parts. The first is the positive impact of BEPS regulations and policies. What we're seeing is that it's really started to change the conversation and the way of thinking for some of these property owners as some of these systems and gas using equipment reaches its end of useful life. They've really started to think about, okay, how do we electrify, and what will that look like? It's also, as monies have become available through like the Montgomery County Green Bank, for example, and the technical assistance program that they have, property owners have started to do energy audits to look at what decarbonization would look like more broadly, and how to, reach the various site EUI targets. As for some of the challenges, I think the biggest is probably the financial limitations and uncertainty. I think there's still a big question of how we're going to pay for all this. And I think, as was noted earlier in the call, speaking to the tension between housing affordability, specifically on the multifamily side, and in places like Montgomery County that have rent stabilization or rent control, how much of this you can pass on to the tenant. And we think that inevitably, based on some of our estimates of how much it's going to cost to comply with BEPS, some of it will have to be passed on to the tenant through rent increases. And so there's still a lot of uncertainty. I know the state has taken steps through the Moore administration to put down a down payment towards meeting the state's climate goals of something to the tune of 90 million. But we know that that this is going to cost many more times that. And so that's probably the biggest thing right now. We know that there's federal dollars out there that the state is aggressively trying to go after and pursue, but that money hasn't yet been made available or hasn't been awarded. And so it's going to be really a big challenge to figure out how to pay for all that. And then just going back to this sort of conversation about thinking how to replace equipment at the end of its useful life, some of the implementation timelines for the various BEPS mandates, and particularly in a place like Montgomery County, which has both county and state BEPS that property owners have to comply with, some of those implementation timelines don't quite match up with when the equipment is ready to be replaced, right? So what do you do then, and how do you do this in a way that makes sense? And it's really a hard and bitter pill to swallow to tell a building owner that maybe just replaced systems a few years ago, that they now have to do it again in the next few years to meet these mandates.
Thank you, Brian. The next question is for Arlington, Maryland, and DC. What elements of the policy regulations are proving to be the most cost-effective? We'll start with Arlington.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that question. And I can dive in, particularly for the county facility upgrades and sort of the decarbonization tool project that we did. And it was all sort of built around, looking at different metrics, GHG savings, energy impacts, and cost effectiveness. So I think that this was something that was really core to the work that we did with the decarbonization tool, where we essentially had 12 county buildings that had, equipment that's nearing the end of its useful life, and sort of built energy models to simulate what the different scenarios could be. So if we had different HVAC upgrades or different bundled measures, and so we could really have a sort of data forward approach to kind of this pre-planning process to help inform the design process. And so it proved to be really effective for the county buildings, and we're expanding to additional facilities to help with that planning process and sort of layer in some additional information, particularly around cost effectiveness. And I think one thing that we've noticed is, looking at sort of some of our sort of ex ante planning costs have shifted a bit during the planning and design process. And so we've been really trying to look at and kind of refine those costs as I think another piece that we've seen is sort of there's a bundle of potential items that we call feasibility considerations when we're looking at electrifying the county buildings. And I think one particular note that has a really big cost and also timing impact is the availability of additional if we need a service upgrade from Dominion. That's been a process that we've been working through on several projects that that expands timelines as well as cost. I think, from our experience, it's been, I think that sort of validates the, sort of this pre-planning, sort of looking at what the options and scenarios are and having that, longer timeline for these upgrades, knowing that those delays may be, and sort of cost impacts may be involved. And so So yeah, so it's been helpful to rely on the decarb tool, expand it to additional buildings and building types, to really look at that cost effectiveness. Another piece that we've been trying to leverage from the decarb tool is a metric looking at sort of cost per GHG savings on different measures or measure packages that we could implement in our facilities. And so really, trying to look at what those costs, could be and sort of the decarbonization opportunities through that financial lens. So really just, really a data-driven approach, knowing that some of the data inputs are, evolving as we go through. But that sort of was by design for the tool, so we could have that flexibility to update as, cost and impacts are shifting. But yeah, so that's just a bit of sort of how we've looked at cost effectiveness and sort of generating those cost effective metrics for our county facilities and county facility upgrades and capital projects.
Thanks, Steve. Now, Sam and Zach, what's your perspective on cost effectiveness of upgrades?
Yeah, I'm happy to take this one. So I think one of the things we've found in a lot of modeling work we had done by Lawrence Berkeley National Lab is really just how cost-effective energy efficiency is for building owners across the state. And so this is something where our regulations as currently proposed are GHG focused only, and that's based on requirements from the state legislature. But one of the things we're communicating a lot to folks as we talk to them is how energy efficiency is really helpful for actually making that all very cost effective. And so when Lawrence Berkeley National Lab did modeling for us of trying to make efficient buildings and electrify to net, or get towards net zero greenhouse gas emissions, they found that the average building in Maryland would actually save $4.47 per square foot over the course of the next 25 years. And so that's, proving to be, could be quite cost effective for the average building in Maryland. And yes, there are outliers there's always outliers and there's different cases. And so that's where for our greenhouse gas requirements, we have an alternative compliance payment essentially that kind of caps the total cost of this work. And so this is that's been something where for us though, this core message that we are always trying to talk to folks about is that energy efficiency really, this not news if you've been in this space for a while, but energy efficiency is very cost effective for most buildings across the state. So that's something that we talk about a lot. And also kind of from a higher level cost effectiveness that we don't necessarily consider in our regulations directly, but energy efficiency also leads in that same study by Berkeley National Labs. They actually found that there's a 6% reduction in peak demand from these buildings if they pursue both efficiency and greenhouse gas goals. And so that's, in a day and age when we're all talking about and worried about the grid growing like crazy, that's kind of some reassuring news. And that's something where, again, that's cost effective kind of at the more macro level for everybody if we reduce peak demand. And the Maryland Public Service Commission actually released a study late last year that modeled Maryland's grid and said, we can handle this electrification that's coming. And the kind of growth in the grid from the building side is really only predicted to be about our historical average growth. So there's not actually a real cause for alarm, and efficiency is going to actually make that even better. So I think those are kind of two key takeaways that we really like to talk about.
All right, thanks. Katie, what are some of the measures that are most cost effective in terms of BEPS?
Yeah, sure. So I think from a higher level, retro commissioning is always a cost-effective thing that building owners can do. That's proven in many studies that you can get pretty good amount of savings with just a little bit of money, effort to do a retro commissioning of your building. And then I would also say here in the district, we did do a cost benefit study, but that was all based on sort of model data. And so I don't really want to dig into that one too much because we do have we have some more, I would say, accurate data based on some of the work we've been doing through our affordable housing retrofit accelerator. And I'll talk a little bit more about the accelerator later on because I think we're going to sort of focus on that topic. But it's essentially a program that the district stood up to help affordable housing buildings comply with our BEPS. And through that program, we're offering, we're reaching out to about, I think we've targeted about 100 affordable housing buildings across the district. We, at this moment, have completed about 70 free energy audits in those buildings, level 2 ASHRAE audits. And through those audits, and every single audit gets reviewed by DOE. So we're looking at them and we're looking at the packages that the auditors are putting together, and we're looking at the packages that the building owners are selecting to move forward in terms of implementation and installation. And some of the data we're seeing through that is that, you know, this is somewhat anecdotal because we haven't done a statistical analysis, but a lot of buildings can get to compliance. And again, I want to remind everybody, compliance is getting a 20% site EUI reduction or getting to the BEPS, right, in the district. That's what that means. It doesn't mean a full decarbonization, obviously. Can get to compliance for this first cycle at around $1 to $2 per square foot. And the most cost-effective measures that we're finding are LED lighting, which is kind of a no-brainer at this point in most buildings. Water efficiency measures are also finding to be pretty cost-effective. And then the other one are VFDs. We're finding those to be kind of the most common and most cost-effective that we can pursue in a lot of these buildings. And again, the Affordable Housing Retrofit Accelerator is focused on multifamily. So I'm only speaking to that sector right now. The other are like boiler controls. And if you have a building that's retaining a hydronic distribution system, but obviously, you know, we're trying to move towards more decarbonization. We're trying to move towards decarbing as much as possible, and where feasible, obviously, in these buildings. I think those are probably the most off the top of my head that I can provide actual like information for, just based on kind of our experience thus far. But I'm interested to see sort of some of the data we get from the building owner side to see, you know, at the end of this cycle, really what was the most cost-effective measures that folks pursued.
Thank you. I'm going to take a question from the chat here from Demetra. It's for Zach. She said she's curious to know whether the LBNL study incorporated the COVID and post-COVID increase in construction.
Yeah, Demetra, I actually think the one you're specifically most interested in is actually this PSC study, the Maryland Public Service Commission study that Sam just posted in the chat. That one really looked at the impacts across Maryland, and it's new enough that they should have been accounting for kind of the growth across all the building sector. The LBNL studies was really focused on our BEPS covered buildings list, which is, you know, a relatively set group.
Thanks so much, Zach. That's great. How did you like working with them? I worked with them a lot when I was in the county of Santa Clara. Great group there.
They're very, very good at what they do.
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you. Next question is for AOBA. How are property owners dealing with non-compliance and any fees and penalties for BEPS or other building decarbonization requirements throughout the region? And what proactive strategies are they implementing to mitigate risks?
So I'm going to answer the first part, and then I think Chris is going to chime in on the second part of that question. So on the non-compliance and fees, no jurisdiction has actually started implementing or levying fines or alternative compliance payments yet. DC is the furthest along, but even their first potential fines or enforcements are still a few years down the road. And so, you know, thinking about that specifically, there's sort of a few categories that our members fall into. They're are the first, those who care about the fines, and they use them to make informed decisions. For them, it's a cost comparison between the alternatives and potential fine avoidance. There's those who recognize fines can happen, but they don't generally consider them in their decision making. For those members, the fine avoidance is important in theory, but in practice, since it hasn't happened, the fines are sort of a non-financial point for them. And then lastly, there's those who don't recognize fines. It's pretty uncommon for our DC members, but happens sometimes with some of our Maryland folks. It's simply because BEPS is new enough in those jurisdictions that, and the fines of not complying is so far away that they just haven't actively started thinking about it yet. And so they're just really at the beginning phases of figuring out what they're going to do, and does it make more sense to pay the fines or make the upgrades and the investments that they need to do to comply. Chris?
Yeah, and on the second part of that, it's actually, sorry, real quick, Chris Penley, Director of Sustainability Policy and Strategy with AOBA, on the kind of risk mitigation section, kind of separating this into kind of DC versus Maryland, because again, DC is a little bit further along than other jurisdictions. What we're seeing on the owner end is actually a lot of what Katie described, right? Where you're looking at largely, I'm going to say colloquially, optimizing what's there. So if you have existing building systems, realistically, in a lot of cases, what building owners are looking to do is to maximize the cost effectiveness of those systems while those systems still have useful life. You have some members that are starting to think about electrification at end of useful life. So you may have you have some buildings that are looking at doing load studies. I think Demetra mentioned load letters, which kind of propagate down a couple of steps past the load study. An electric load study at a very basic level is okay if you're adding electric load to a building. Do you have enough service? What sorts of things might you need? The load letter happens kind of when you're ready to hit design phase effectively. But you're seeing some building owners looking at taking that first step to figure out, like, oh, okay, we need, if we're going to electrify our building, we need another 300 amps of service. We need 400 or 500 amps of service. And what we're seeing is that again, building owners are generally speaking looking at that sort of work.
All right, thanks for those answers. The next question is for Arlington and MDE and DOEE. What modeling or data tools does your jurisdiction have in place to track building decarbonization targets and BEPS compliance? And I know for Arlington, you have a decarbonization tool. So we'll start with Steve at Arlington.
Steve, you're muted.
Thanks so much. I appreciate that. I was seeing how long I could go before I did that. But yeah, so so for the decarb tool, I think that that's really looking at the what are the opportunities, what are and doing it in a really data driven format. I think one of the one of the key inputs into that was leveraging the 30-minute AMI data, so we could really see each facility's electricity load. That was really helpful to compare to what is the capacity of the current electrical system, layering in maintenance requirements and data. And so I think the tool really helped to pull together a lot of that information on the front end to help inform the the program or the project design going forward as it went through sort of the capital budgeting process and through the engineering designs and studies. And it really kind of helped frame sort of what potential options could be and what sort of the orders of magnitude and sort of what are the metrics around the opportunities that we need to do with this equipment that's nearing the end of its useful life. So I think that there was a lot of data input into the tool, and then the tool provided those sort of key metrics on the front end to help with the selecting the final equipment types and sort of bundled measures that we're taking forward for our capital projects. I think one thing that we're really looking at and planning for is the EM&V of these facilities and seeing how sort of what we planned on the front end aligned with, sort of how the operational characteristics are on the back end. So we have a pretty robust utility energy management tracking system. And so looking for ways to, to really track the data, track sort of how the planned installations are impacting the or operating and after installation. So that's sort of one key piece that we're doing. We're sort of on the front end and still in design phase for one community center in particular that we are going to put a VRF system in and replace sort of the current hydronic boilers. So we're excited about that project, and there's also some shell measures to help with the sort of overall shell of the building to help look to reduce the electric load. So that'll be one key one that we have teed up for the evaluation and process. We also have a energy dashboard where all of the county facilities are available, so you can see how the buildings are performing with the monthly data, as well as our annual benchmarking and participation in the energy and the DOE's Better Climate Challenge, where we annually report on the energy use that's been benchmarked in the facilities, as well as we have an EUI target and then a specific GHG target for the covered facilities under that reporting. So really trying to have the full sort of spectrum of from a really robust kind of like pre-planning process and leveraging the tools and inputs to that through the planning, construction, and then operation, and then reporting out on the back end, so we can really have a data-driven approach to to our facilities and our decarbonization efforts.
Thank you, Steve. Sam and Zach, what sort of data and modeling tools are you looking at over at MDE?
Sure thing. So the chosen benchmarking tool for Maryland's proposed building energy performance standards is US EPA's Energy Star Portfolio Manager, which is heavily used by many jurisdictions around the country. It's been doing this work for a long time. It's a free tool that anyone can access, and there's incredible trainings online through EPA Energy Star to help anyone get up to speed with the platform and quickly become adept in how it works. So that is the chosen benchmarking tool for MD BEPS, and building owners will create their accounts, take all of their property characteristics as it relates to them, create a shell for their property in Portfolio Manager, and then through partnering with their utility providers, load in energy data, their calendar year energy data, report it to us, and that'll spit out their building's performance, and in which they can assess on their end how they're performing against the proposed standards, but then also MDE and MDE compliance will determine the building's progress towards the proposed standards for that set year. So that is the chosen tool for sharing energy data with the department. It's we're heavily working with building owners at this time through some upcoming working groups on specific guidance for using Energy Star as it relates to MD BEPS. And these working groups also feature some representatives from EPA Energy Star to give bring some guidance on how the tool works. And so that draft guidance on MD BEPS benchmarking is available online today. So that's how we receive all the data from building owners. And then in the background, as we mentioned, we've been working heavily with U.S. national labs, Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, and Pacific Northwest National Lab, and they are assisting us, more so on modeling and analysis, but also we're incorporating other free tools, in the background to specifically tools like SEED to analyze the data that's coming into us. So EPA Energy Star Portfolio Manager is here today. It's a proven tool and it's free for all, and that's what we've chosen to go with.
Thank you. Katie, what data and modeling tools does your team use to track targets and compliance?
Yeah, I can share my, is it okay for me to share my screen? I didn't prepare a presentation earlier, but okay. But I do have things I can share. So let's see if I can get Chrome to come up. Can you all see Chrome right now? Okay, great. So I mentioned earlier, we have our clean energy DC plan. So we have this pretty cool website, which kind of talks about the plan. And we're actually in the process of doing a CDC 2.0, which is just essentially an update to the original Clean Energy DC plan. But this tool, this webpage is pretty cool. You can go to this website that talks about our progress towards meeting our climate targets. We did a progress report on CDC in 2020 and then 2022. So this website only, I think, has updates up till 2021. But I imagine we're going to probably do another either progress report or maybe we'll see updates through CDC 2.0. You can go through and kind of see progress we're making on different things like greenhouse gas emission reductions, energy reductions, and then also through the RPS I mentioned, so how much renewable energy generation is going on. So this is one tool that is a public website that anybody could go review and look at if you want to. So that's our overall, like I said, climate action plan. When it comes to BEPS, we've done quite a lot of work to kind of make information as transparent as possible to the general public. So I'll start with our benchmarking map, as we call it. It's more like an interactive tool. So we stood this up several years ago, and it's just sort of a visualization of all of the benchmarking data that we collect. Again, we've had a benchmarking law effectively in place since 2013. If you go to the website, you can see this is a map of the district. All these little dots are buildings. These are all buildings that have to report data to us. If you click on any one of them, it'll give you information about that building. So right now we are on the 2023 data. So we just published our calendar year 2023 data. If you click on this little calendar over here, you can see all the way back to 2012 for some of these buildings. And this will just tell you sort of this building, and it'll give you where it's located, its portfolio manager ID. We also use portfolio manager to Sam's point, to collect the data. That's how buildings comply with our benchmarking, and we use that data also to set the BEPS. And so you can also, for each building, click on the scorecard for the building, and if you scroll down, it just sort of tells you some information like how this building's been performing over time, and then in relation to other buildings of a similar type across the district. And then this one doesn't have it, but generally it gives you a estimate on energy cost data for that building. So this is all, sorry, I got out of there, but that's all public information. This is a publicly available website. You can use the filters on the left-hand side. You can also use the filters on the top to sort of narrow down to different property types you might want to be looking at. And if you want to look at the raw data, you can go to this link that says download data. And they'll take you to another website where you can download all the spreadsheets that kind of it's all the raw data that goes into this map. So that's one tool that we've had that in place for 7 years, something like that. And then this website is a tool that we set up to really help with compliance with building owners. This is our knowledge base. Each section of the knowledge base has different articles on that topic. So if you want to look at our BEPS, you go here, and it's pretty much just a list of frequently asked questions about our BEPS program. And anytime you click on one of these, it has a response to that specific question. We also have a training video where you can watch 101 on our BEPS. And then we also, on the left-hand side, you can ask our team questions by submitting a ticket. So when you click on one of these tickets, you can submit a question to our team. We answer anywhere between 8,000 to 10,000 emails a year. And well, we're not necessarily responding, but we're sending out 8,000 to 10,000 emails a year. Sort of when we get the data, we also do a lot of data quality checks. And so that sends a lot of automated emails to folks. So that's kind of what our knowledge base looks like. This is connected on the back end to a tool called BEAM. You can see at the top says BEAM, which is Building Energy Assessment Manager. I always get the acronym wrong, and the developer is going to kill me because I always get it wrong. But this is a tool that is actually sort of built off of SEED, which Sam mentioned a little while ago. BEAM sort of has a couple components to it. One, it has a backend database where we collect all of the data. So we collect all the data from Portfolio Manager. We pull it out through an API. We use EPA's web services. So we pull all that data out automatically. It goes into our database. We do a lot of automated quality checks on the data to make sure that it's complete and accurate. And then there's a customer service component to it. So it also has a CRM. As I mentioned, people can submit inquiries to us. And so we can tag all of those questions to actual properties. So when we go into our database, we can say, okay, here's a property. How many times have we talked to them? What have we said to them? All those types of things. There's a public facing piece, which you're looking at right now. This is just our public website of information about our program. And then the fourth piece is the building owner portal, which is very much still in construction, but the building owner portal is sort of a specific portal for each building owner to be able to track their own compliance for each building that they are connected to. Again, it's still very much under construction because we've been kind of really focused on the other pieces of how do we track compliance on our end. How do we communicate with building owners and things like that. So those are the things that we've done in terms of BEPS compliance. And I'm happy to answer any questions about this or talk about sort of what the procurement process was if anyone has questions. And then, like I said, we have this map that sort of shows all of the data and has a public disclosure piece of it where you can look at all the data.
Thank you, Katie. The next question is for AOBA. How are energy efficient building policies and regulations specifically impacting small property owners and underserved communities?
Yeah, so for small property owners, the challenge is a staffing issue. They're less likely than some of the bigger property owners to have a dedicated sustainability person or sustainability team. And so it's going to be a little bit more of a challenge for them to figure out what exactly they need to do. And that's why programs like the county's technical assistance program are so important for building owners of all types, but particularly small ones. We found that our smaller members that own properties, as I said, are more likely to need direct help in funding or financing to help meet the regulations. And I think generally it sounds like policymakers are, I think, aware of that and those challenges. On the underserved communities piece, going back to the tension between housing affordability in particular and the cost of complying with BEPS. And as I said, some of those costs having to be passed on to the tenants. I think the reality of it is that there are going to be instances where it will result in high rent increases for some of these tenants. In some instances, for some of these very old multifamily properties and buildings, it may not make sense. It just the projects may not pencil out. And so I think the calculations that property owners are starting to make and some of our members are starting to make is, well, and particularly in a place like Montgomery County, which, as I said, has rent stabilization and has a 23-year exemption from that law for new construction. So some of the calculus that they're doing is, does it make sense to invest in such deep levels of energy efficiency when the payback might not be that great from a tenant perspective? There's certainly livability and quality of life improvements from that, but it's not like you're putting in, new kitchens, new flooring, new bathrooms. So, you might have a building that is highly energy efficient, but it's still, fairly old and not modern in any way, and not what a tenant would be willing to pay top dollar for. And so the calculus that that these owners are then having to make is, well, does it make sense to do all these investments, or do we tear down and start anew? And so I think, again, as you know, we've sort of hit on a few times, we're at the very early stages of property owners figuring out what they want to do and how they're going to comply. And I think as you know they get deeper along this path, they'll start making some of these decisions, and some of it very well could be tenant displacement. But you know, on the positive side, to sort of end on a positive note, you know, I know that the tenant advocates, the CASAs of the world, and you know, folks that advocate on behalf of tenants generally want these improvements to happen because, as I sort of just said, it is a quality of life and livability thing, right? It's a comfort thing when you have HVAC systems that are modern and are able to cool and heat to the appropriate temperatures, or prevent the buildup of mold in the units and things like that. And so what we've started to see is some members that have moved forward with some of these projects from all the various funding sources that are available currently, like Maryland's MEHA program, to start doing these things, not necessarily with an eye towards BEPS, but you know, with an eye towards, you know, end of useful life and you know, again, upgrading tenant spaces and meeting housing codes and maintenance conditions.
Thanks, Brian. Perfect segue to the next question for the governments is, how can area governments ensure equitable access to resources and support for building decarbonization, especially for small property owners and underserved communities? And we'll go first to Arlington.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that we have a very exciting grant project that the county was just awarded through the EPA, through the Environmental Justice G2G grant. And it was looking right at this very specific problem and how we can sort of provide opportunities and sort of tools and for this. And so, so the sort of fundamentals from the grant are really based on sort of like, you know, kind of three main components. One is replicating the decarb tool and sort of the value that we found at the county level for a broader sort of community based along several low-income disadvantaged communities in the county. And so we're going to, you know, hopefully, or we're going to develop the tool to help provide, you know, sort of these scenario upgrades for building owners. We're going to leverage, you know, some CBEX data, some data from CoStar, and sort of bring together some modeling of buildings and just really what are the opportunities for, you know, residential, small commercial, just really buildings in these communities, and also have a process that folks have data of their own, and we can work with them to incorporate that for, you know, to have a really robust sort of model for their specific buildings. And so we're really excited about that grant program that just going through the paperwork now and sort of doing all the administrative stuff on the front end to really dive into that over the next several months and years for that. But really, we're excited about that. That's going to be paired with a really strategic and robust community outreach program with building owners, building operators, residents, the business community to really sort of understand their perspective and really inform the tool and tool development. And then lastly, the third component of it is bringing together the, you know, what financial incentives and opportunities there are to and have that financial toolkit as well. And so we're very excited about this opportunity to really get at, you know, how can we provide resources, support, high level energy modeling, and sort of, you know, where do we start with a building decarbonization project. And so that's our kind of exciting project, and sort of excited that we're able to take our lessons learned and the value that we've seen from our existing county buildings in that process and then apply it to a community program.
Thank you, Steve. Sam and Zach, how is MDE looking at equitable access for decarbonization for small property owners in underserved communities?
Sure, thank you. So I think first and foremost, you know, the state is, you know, trying to learn from Maryland's local jurisdictions. They are the experts in their local areas, and so in a partnership with some Clearly Energy and Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnerships, we were able to stand up a cohort for Maryland's local governments, being county level, city and towns across the state, that, you know, brings all of these jurisdictions together and brings in varying expertise so that we can work together on BEPS implementation and resource provision across the state. And so that is a 2-lane road that is, not only are we able to provide resources to local counties about BEPS, make sure awareness is getting out about the policy, but they're bringing really valuable information to us on, what their counties need and what their constituents are saying about BEPS. And so this has been a very, very valuable resource for us. And, the cohort is active and open today. And so we'd encourage, any Maryland jurisdictions that haven't heard of it or were hesitant to join in to, give it a test run and see if it's helpful for you. And so we have a slide prepared for that. That's I think, Leah, if we could have that sent out at the end, that'd be just a great. Hope that's a great resource for everyone. But something we found through this cohort and also in our stakeholder engagement process is, taking a step back and looking at stakeholder mapping and talking about the goals of the policy and who it's going to impact, and getting lists together about who the stakeholders are for BEPS. And so, being able to do that with local government gave us a really wide swath of stakeholders and a huge map to work from. And then from there, we're seeing different stakeholder groups are able to put them together and see what kind of engagement needs to happen. And from there, we're working to work with community navigators to help us get into these communities and talk with these communities about BEPS and other decarbonization policies. And we have resources available through the state, through Maryland Clean Energy Center and Maryland Energy Administration's Clean Buildings Hub, which is first mile of support for decarbonization incentives. But I think it's that it's really important for us to have local community navigators that can convey this information, and they're kind of the key into the communities that need this information the most. So that's something we're working towards, and we think that'd be helpful for a lot of local governments. And I think also, in Maryland, through the Department of Housing and Community Development, we have robust funding to provide up to 100% of the costs of weatherization and electrification for low-income households. And this is available to all, housing providers, large and small, that qualify. And so, in other ways, is affordable housing is a key resource or a key segue into low and moderate income families and underserved communities. And so, we have additional flexibilities in the regulation for affordable housing providers. And yeah, so we're continuing to try and improve our equitable engagement. And, but we rely heavily on local government to assist us in all that.
Thank you, Sam. We're almost out of time, but Katie, what are your parting thoughts on this topic about how your team ensures equitable access and support for decarbonization for small property owners and underserved communities?
Yeah, so I'll make a couple points and I'll try to be quick. So when it comes to BEPS, I think the first thing we did is we just held discussion groups to figure out, folks that work in specifically, we did specifically focus a lot on affordable housing at the beginning. And sort of the conversations were that we felt it was important to kind of make sure that affordable housing was being held to the same standards as market rate buildings, because we felt that folks that live in affordable housing deserve to have buildings that are invested in just like market rate buildings. But what we heard from a lot of affordable housing, either advocates, owners, developers that we were working with at the beginning. Again, we held sort of these working group sessions with them specifically and came out with like a list of recommendations for the city as to, you know, what we need to do in order to help support them. And it was mostly, we want to do these things, we want to have high performing, healthy buildings, but we need technical assistance and we need money to be able to do this. So we focused a lot on that technical assistance part at first, and really, you know, I hired someone whose job is specifically to work with the affordable housing sector on BEPS. And then we kind of went step by step to try to implement those recommendations. And then that sort of led to us standing up the Affordable Housing Retrofit Accelerator, which, as I mentioned, it's run through a couple partners that we have, but the energy audits are being done through the DC Sustainable Energy Utility. And again, we've given up, we've now performed about 70 free energy audits, and I think we've completed 18 to 20 projects in those buildings. So we're continuing to try to get more funding so that we can keep supporting those buildings through that Affordable Housing Retrofit Accelerator. The idea behind that is we would give the free energy audit and then sit down with the building owner and sort of figure out what are the different measures that they want to partake in their building that will help them get to compliance. So we help them with that modeling to figure out what's going to get you to an XYZ Energy Star score or to a certain site EUI. And then we figure out how we can either help pay directly for those installations or connect the building owner to the DC Green Bank for some creative financing options. So that's one thing that we've really been focused on a lot. And then recently we actually started trying to do more on the resident engagement front. We just completed a grant project with the National Housing Trust, was the grantee, where they sort of went around to different affordable housing buildings across the district to talk about electrification with the residents and sort of get their input as to how they feel about electrification. And, you know, we just held a workshop about this yesterday, so I just came from that yesterday. And so it involves a lot of community-based organizations sort of advising us on like, how do we continue this work? How do we continue to engage actual residents that are living in these buildings that are going to be affected by this policy, particularly in the low to moderate income bracket? And then the last thing I'll say when it comes to smaller buildings, one thing that we're doing is we're really trying to figure out, because right now our BEPS applies to buildings 50,000 square feet and above, but eventually we'll drop down to 10,000 square feet. I personally have real concerns about a BEPS policy being applied to buildings that small. And so I think we're trying to figure out if there's kind of different policies that might be more appropriate for those types of buildings. And also we want to try to engage them early so they understand what those requirements are. So we applied for block grant funding from the U.S. Department of Energy to actually launch a retro commissioning or retuning pilots in the district. And so that is very much in the design phase, but we'll be focused on those smaller buildings. We're hoping to launch it within the next year or so, where we would just pilot some retro commissioning, retuning measures in some of those smaller buildings. And A, be able to engage them on these policies, B, sort of figure out what the efficacy of, you know, retro commissioning is or retuning in these buildings, and then collect a lot of data on these buildings. So when we do start talking about electrification and decarbonization, we really know what we're talking about when we start talking about smaller commercial buildings. So those are some of the things that we're exploring here and we've been implementing.
All right. Thank you, Katie. Thank you to the other panelists for this great information. And I'll hand it back over to Andy.
All right. Thanks, Al. And then I'm going to turn it over to Leah and Robert for some COG staff announcements.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say thank you to the panelists. I think that was a great conversation. When designing the conversation, there's so much more that we can really get into. Like, one of the things that we didn't have time to get to, and one of the questions that I did not include was what we're hearing sort of on the executive level, like executive director of COG is looking at and talking to other folks at that level, like commercial buildings, how after COVID, they went vacant. So how are they dealing with, kind of repurposing commercial buildings, private sector into residential buildings. What does that look like? Will that impact our greenhouse gas emissions locally and on a regional level? So we couldn't get into that conversation, but I think it's worth sort of putting out there. Maybe we can come back at another date. We do have another meeting in November. So if you guys are interested in that, send us an email and we can put that together. But just to go quickly, we have about 4 minutes left. You have up on your screen, we're doing a solar seminar in October. We're partnering with Mason Energy, which is a George Mason University initiative, and local and regional partners to convene stakeholders in 2024 in the fall and in spring to support, accelerated action and address some of the challenges of sort of non-utility scale solar deployment in the region. And so the fall workshop will be on October 28th at the George Mason's Arlington County campus. It is 10 to 4. That was specifically is designed to look at or convene various sectors of local government involved in launching solar and including energy procurement and facility staff. So please come out, listen to the experts on solar arena, and then we'll follow up again in spring 2025. And Robert?
Good afternoon, everyone. A couple of updates regarding the EV work that COG is doing and also the Environmental Justice Subcommittee. And I'll start with the EV stuff. So the first update is that the REVI strategy, which you may have seen, some of you had seen an email about last week, has finally been completed. It's a tool to help members across the region implement their clean fuel vehicle strategies. And that has 3 objectives, which is to identify locations for publicly accessible level 2 and DC fast charging, support reliable access to publicly accessible EV charging infrastructure, and help ensure that all populations across the region are able to access the financial and environmental benefits of EVs. So that strategy has launched, and the email that went out last week, you can access the link, and then there are also jurisdictional profiles that are paired with the mapping tool to help you determine where to install chargers. In addition to that, we also announced last week that COG was awarded almost $4 million in the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Round 1B awards, which will go to support the installation of electric chargers across the region. And also, finally, in the EV space, the Carbon Reduction Program also supports the region's efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And City of Rockville and Montgomery County were both awarded funding for EV chargers under the Carbon Reduction Program. Moving on to the Environmental Justice Subcommittee. The subcommittee kicked off in May and over a series of meetings approved a stakeholder engagement strategy in conjunction with AECOM, our consultant, and Equitable Cities, their subcontractor. They have started undertaking stakeholder engagement across the region. They'll wrap up round 1 of that at the end of this month and use the feedback from round 1 to develop a draft of the Environmental Justice Action Plan. And then they will take that back to those communities for review in a round 2 engagement. And that's currently where we stand. Thank you.
Okay, I think that makes it a wrap for today. Right at 12 o'clock, we hit it on the nose. So thanks to Leah and the rest of the COG staff for putting together today's meeting. Thanks Al for facilitating our great panelists. Thank you all to all the panelists for sharing their thoughts and programs with us today. And our next meeting, the last meeting of the year, will be in November on November 21st. So thank you all for being here today. Have a great day. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks all.